determined by the government. So what's going on? Dr. Mehmet Oz, host of the Dr. Oz Show, director of Columbia University's Integrative Medicine Center. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Lou.
There you heard the CEO say, with the designation, because I've been asking this question of everyone, whether it's Alex Azar, HHS, whether it's Dr. Fauci, whomever. Why not make it a pandemic? Because it is a pandemic by any other definition than that of the World Health Organization.
I think it got caught up in the internal nomenclature battles within the WHO. And why it hasn't happened, colleagues of mine have been arguing the same thing you've been saying. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference anymore. I'm not concerned about an epidemic or a pandemic. I'm concerned about an endemic virus, which means the virus is always with us. Right? SARS was all over the place, scared us, but it disappeared by itself. There was no vaccine made. It literally died out. It burned out. MERS, these tend to die out because they're too virulent. Right. This virus, and it is a mutated virus. It's not man-made. That I'm pretty confident of based just on the studies that I've seen. But this thing somehow came about where it had just the right amount of virulence. So it doesn't kill you, because viruses that kill you kill themselves.
Right.
But it's incredibly contagious. So we got to get out with these vaccines. I think the U.S. government is already pushing as hard as they can. But the real worry is that we'll rush a vaccine out, give it to a few 100 million people, and run into consequences we never anticipated. And that would put well, you could affect, for example, the fetus in a pregnant woman, and that's a population that's at risk. You could hasten the death in some people with chronic illnesses. They're the ones that are at risk. And here's the thing. I just before walking out on the stage saw some of the data from Korea, which is very different from the data that the Chinese CDC shared us. It's a much lower incidence of death, which means if I've got a population that's not dying any more commonly than the flu virus kills us, why would I take a big chance with a vaccine? I don't want to slow it down. Certainly we don't want to waste time that otherwise we're just in a bureaucracy, but move it along, but expect it to take a year, which is what everybody I trust in the space has told me is a reasonable expectation.
A reasonable expectation, Dr. Fauci saying very clearly, Dr. Anthony Fauci of NIH, head of the infectious diseases program, saying that he expects a year to a year and a half, even though we hear others saying that they have a ready-to-go vaccine. And the definition, by his reasoning, at his firm, with a vaccine that's ready to go, is that WHO designation or designation by the Centers for Disease Control makes it possible to expedite. And you know, one of the great political issues here will be when we're in a few months ahead, we're looking back on what was decided, what wasn't. They're going to be asking, did we do everything we can as quickly as we can if we have, God forbid, a huge number of fatalities?
Well, I spoke to Seema Verma today, actually, on Fox News, and she's pretty clear about the fact that they're doing everything humanly possible to deal with the acute issues, like do we have enough hospital beds, do we have enough ventilators, and do we have enough testing kits?
Do you think we do?
No, we don't have enough of any of those things yet.
I mean, they're not dealing with a problem if they're not solving the problem.
They haven't solved
they're aware of a problem.
They're aware
That's
of a
quite
problem.
a difference.
And it's been about 50 days since the first case, so people are starting to get a bit agitated. But long term, you want to make sure the vaccine you put out there is effective, or you really undermine the confidence of the public. Yes. Here's my argument.
Surely.
We're telling people not to panic. It's really hard not to panic. It's difficult to... Nike doesn't say just don't do it. They say just do it. So our arguments ought to be, we're a can-do population. Americans go out there, we mobilize, we get things done. Give us our marching orders. Let's do what we can do for ourselves. There's one sheet that I noticed is on your desk. Right. We're putting it out on all of my social sites. You should put it out if you don't mind. It's a one-sheet primer on the simple things to do.
Let me interrupt you.
Please.
This sheet that Dr. Oz is referring to is up on at Lou Dobbs on Twitter and available to you, and it'll be on Instagram and everything and Facebook.
So do those things while the American public is doing what they can to become a firewall for the virus, including social distancing. The U.S. government has an obligation back, which is to deal with the things I mentioned, plus making sure this vaccine gets out. And there are a bunch of companies developing vaccines. I know of a few that have gotten enough promising data they're going to move into animal trials. Let's get these guys going. I don't think a nomenclature designation is going to be a game changer here. That's just a matter of the U.S. government.
Well, we're going to have to solve that issue, because that issue is now very much alive for the first time. And it's the only thing that explains to me rationally and effectively why there would be such an institutional reticence to use a designation for what is obviously, this is not a game. This is, this is not a place for PC nonsense. A pandemic is what this is, and I think you agree with me
Yes,
on that.
it spread to
So
more
let's
than
call
two
it what
countries.
it
It is that.
In line with you're talking about, we're dealing with adults here, and we don't need to be worrying about them panicking. I say it a different way. America is not a nation of buttercups and daffodils.
Right.
We are used to being treated with respect as citizens and adults, and we expect our government to do the same. Your thoughts as we look at this now with the cruise ships? We're now, Dr. Fauci has said, no cruises in the cruise thing right now. Your thoughts about what people, particularly in the 60 to 80 age group, should be worried about?
Well, the age is important, but whether you have a chronic illness is even more important. So if you've got cardiovascular disease, lung issues, asthma, diabetes, that population should social distance, which means don't go in the subway in rush hour if you don't have to. Don't go to big ball games. I would avoid major trips. But I don't want the rest of the U.S. population shutting down. I don't want them panicked about what they may have heard.
All right. Dr. Oz, great to have you with us. Thanks so much. And as I said, on Twitter, @BlowDobbs.